I am going to ask Bruce and others, like if you don't mind watching the chat and watching for hand raises, only because it is tough to see it on my screen as we go through. But please, if something important pops up, you can just sort of talk to me and let me know, and we can address questions as they come up. But we will try to get through the slides as quick as we can to get to questions too. So I think the place to start for me is a little bit of an introduction. So there we go. And so, a little bit about me, like why am I here and where did I come from? So I live in Maine in the United States. It's a very rural state, which means there's not a lot of people that live here. And we're mostly an agricultural and fishing society. But we do also do a lot with CubeSats here, and we're very excited about it. As I said, I do a lot with competitions. And so myself, I'm an engineer by trade. And so an engineer is somebody who just uses math and physics and programming and computers, basically gather up all these tools and then use them to try to make some kind of device or project or satellite, whatever it may be. But we put science and math to it and we make things happen. And so I've been doing that for about 20 years, very much enjoy it. And as Bruce said, if you have any questions outside of CubeSats, maybe related to music or things like skateboarding, I love skateboarding as well. I run all the time. And as he said, chess. I am a competitive chess player. I'm also a US chess tournament director. And so if you have any questions about chess, we could have a little side chat as well. So that's a little bit about me. A little bit more about Maine. So I know a lot of you might not know much about Maine or even where it is on a map. So here we are looking at the United States, and Maine is right up here in this top right-hand corner. So Maine is pretty unique in that we are the northernmost, easternmost state in the United States, which gives us the unique situation that we get the very first daylight on the eastern seaboard for the United States. And in fact, people go to what's called Cadillac Mountain on the coast of Maine, and we get the very first light hits the top of that mountain in the morning. So people usually congregate there on holidays to get that sunrise. It's really pretty. So other things that we're known for in Maine is we are well known for being cold. We are pretty northern. I know we have some people from Canada and Russia on here, so I don't hold the title for the coldest place, but we are pretty cold up here. And we're also known for our oceans and our lighthouses. We have, I think, the highest density of lighthouses in the United States. And people go there all the time to take a look at our lighthouses. They're very pretty. We're also known for Mount Katahdin, which is a very famous mountain here in Maine. It is part of the Appalachian Trail system. And if there are outdoor people who like to go hiking in the group, you'd be very interested in Mount Katahdin because it's part of that system. And it has a really nice, what we call a knife edge on the top of the mountain. So it's just a very narrow little walkway. And when you're on the top, you can look down about, 1,000, what does it be? About 3,000 kilometers down. I think I said that right. Maybe 2 kilometers down. Anyway, it's very high and a little scary. Another thing we're known for is lobster. I love to eat lobster. So Maine has the Gulf of Maine, which is the world's richest repository of crustaceans in the world. And we catch lobsters here all the time and we bake them up and they're so good. If you have not tried a lobster, I highly recommend it. I know they're very expensive and hard to find in some places in the world. You'll just have to come to Maine and you can just reach into the ocean and pick one yourself. It'd be kind of cool. And the last thing we're known for is our wild blueberries. So Maine wild blueberries are given all over the world. They have a very unique flavor to them, and they're just delicious as well. So in the summertime, we love to just walk down the street, and we can usually find a blueberry bush on the side of the road, and we can just start picking blueberries. Very delicious. Okay, another thing we're becoming well known for is satellites. So what you're looking at here is a picture on the left. This is a company that started in Maine. They're called Blue Shift, and they're creating a new kind of rocket. And they're looking specifically to put rockets launched from Maine. Again, you can see the snow. It's very cold here. And those rockets are being built specifically to launch CubeSats into space. And it's pretty unique. In Maine, we can do what's called a polar orbit, which is a very unique kind of orbit that most satellites, when they launch, they go around the equator of the Earth. But because we're so north up in Maine here, we can launch satellites that go from the pole to pole, basically north to south, which is opposite to most satellites. So that makes us kind of unique to be able to do that. And the picture on the right is our very first Maine satellite that we're building. And in fact, we're launching that with NASA this summer. It's called MESat-1. And this CubeSat that you're looking at has been designed and built by high schoolers here in the state of Maine. And again, it's our very first satellite that we've ever launched, and everyone here is very excited about it to actually put the hardware into space. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about what exactly a CubeSat is. And so what I have is just a short little video. This was actually made by NASA here in the United States, and it's just gonna talk a little bit about what CubeSats do. And if you can't hear the sound, somebody's gonna have to tell me, but I'm pretty sure this should work.
Have you dreamed of getting your pilot license and soaring through the sky? Introducing Private Pilot Made Easy, your launch pad to turning those dreams into reality. Our Private Pilot Ground School comes with 35 hours of videos. Each lesson is 3 to 5 minutes long, allowing you to easily pick up from where you left off. Go through the class at your own pace. With lifetime access for a small one-time fee, you can come back anytime to brush up on your knowledge. We bring lessons to life with scenario-based training and interactive learning tools, like our 3D airspace models. Professional 3D animations also help you breeze through complicated topics while truly understanding them. Our class comes with double the content of many popular alternatives so that you become a safe, knowledgeable, and confident pilot. There are more than 800 practice questions in this class, complete with video explanations. Arrive to your flight lessons prepared. Students going through this class are scoring 92% on their FAA exams on average. The class is taught by a former university professor and flight school president with decades of industry experience. Pilot Institute has received more than 24,000 five-star reviews and trained more than 250,000 happy pilots. Try the class risk-free. In addition to our 30-day hassle-free money-back guarantee, we will refund the class and pay for your next FAA test if you fail your written exam. Say goodbye to boring, outdated ground training. The future of pilot training is here. It's never been easier to accomplish your aviation dreams. If you're looking for modern pilot training, we look forward to seeing you in the class.
This is what Ivy League universities you can get into with a 3.6 GPA.
90% of students with a 4.0 plus GPAs get rejected from universities like Harvard, Stanford, and other top 10 universities. Your child needs these 3 key factors to get into an Ivy League or top 25 university. And it's not having a good GPA or SAT score. Let me explain. Top universities made SAT and ACT submissions optional. And with
What is a CubeSat? As you might guess, a CubeSat is shaped like a cube, about 4 inches wide, long, and deep. That's called 1 unit, or 1U. Small enough to hold in your hand, and very light, around 3 pounds. And like building blocks, units can be combined to make bigger CubeSats by stacking them into 2, 3, or even 6 units. Once in space, CubeSats can open up all kinds of tools: solar panels for power, communications antennas, telescopes, and more. CubeSats are great because they let schools, universities, and other teams launch their very own missions, and who knows what they'll discover. CubeSats are also made from standard, low-cost parts that are easy to get, tested for launch safety. Some NASA launches carry spacecraft that don't take up all the space on their rockets, which leaves plenty of room for tiny CubeSats. Build a CubeSat, catch a rocket ride, and you become a space explorer.
Okay, so what you just saw was a little introduction to CubeSats, right? They are tiny, tiny little satellites. We call them CubeSats because they are in the shape of a cube. And when we talk about CubeSats, we don't really talk about the size. Again, what CubeSat means is it's really more of like, what's the shape? It's literally a cube, 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And when you have that, we call it a 1U satellite. And U stands for unit. So it's a 1 unit satellite. But they can come in different sizes. You can have a 2U satellite, which means you just take 2 cubes, stack them on top of each other. They're not different pieces. They can all be made out of the same piece, but they just fit the size of, instead of 10 by 10 by 10, now it's 10 by 10 by 20, right? And you can do the same thing for 3, 6, 12. You can sort of build them any way you want, but we usually do stop at 12. Very rarely would you see a cube satellite get bigger than 12U in size, because at that point, you know, you might as well make something else instead of trying to make it fit inside that particular box. And so over on the right, you can see there's 2 satellites that have been proposed. I'm actually not sure whose satellites these are. This is a picture I found off the internet, but you can see on the left, there's the 1U. So it's just a small cube. And then on the right, you see there's the 3U. And again, you can see that it's 3 times as tall, but it's not like it's made out of 3 pieces. It's still just one big piece, right? And in fact, just by looking at it, you can get a lot of information about what that satellite is trying to do, because they all do different things. And in fact, we'll talk about that more in a minute. Like as I look at this 1U satellite, I can see a couple things. I see that it must have a computer inside. I see some computer connections. I can see here that there are some solar panels on the side. So clearly this is meant to be in outer space and to, interact with the sun. This taller one though is a little bit different. I don't really see any computer connections on here. So functionally it's got some different stuff going on. And that's what's kind of great about these CubeSats is you can really customize them and make them do whatever it is you want to do. Okay, we'll talk more about that in just a second. But I can't talk about CubeSats without mentioning Dr. Bob Twiggs. He is considered like the father of CubeSats. He's the one who came up with the idea of why not make small satellites and make them in the shape of a cube. It doesn't sound that amazing, but for a long time, this was really an impossible feat. Technology really had to get better in order for us to be able to make satellites this small. And what Bob Twiggs was able to do is it really forced people to think really hard about how can we do it? How is it possible to get things that small, fit inside of this box and still operate like we want a satellite to do, right? Gather data, take pictures, have a battery, do all of these things and fit it in that small space. It's really hard. In fact, it's kind of a fun story about how Bob Twiggs kind of came about this. So he was a professor at Stanford University, and he challenged some of his students to actually make this first CubeSat ever. And the way he got the idea, and maybe this is before a lot of your time and you might not know it, but back when I was a kid, there was a thing called the Beanie Baby. Is anybody familiar with Beanie Babies? I know you can still buy them at the store. They're basically little tiny stuffed animals. And the story goes that he bought one, I think, for one of his children. And he had the box. And then he kind of had the idea, well, why don't I take this box that this Beanie Baby came in, and I wonder if I could turn that box into a satellite, right? Pretty interesting how that comes together. So that's where CubeSats were really born. And this was back in 30 years ago when this started. And so CubeSats have really been growing in popularity ever since. And there's many reasons why. Okay, but before I get into more details, I do want to stop for a bit of trivia. So this is a trivia time. In fact, I'm going to have a couple questions for you all as I go through this talk to kind of break it up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions. And if you get the questions right, they're worth points. And we're going to see how many points you get as we go through our talk. Okay, so the first question is worth 100 points. And does anybody know what the name of the first satellite into space was? And here I will stop this and I will take a look at the chat. So who knows what the name of the first satellite was?
CubeSat 1, Sputnik 1.
Sputnik, you got it. Absolutely. So let me go back to my presentation.
Your father knows about saving money. Everything I'm wearing, I've had since boot camp.
And I just saved on my car insurance.
Yep. So Sputnik. And yeah, so Sputnik actually, I don't know why I have the 19 on there. Apologies for that. But Sputnik, what it means in Russian is fellow traveler. And yes, this launched in 1957 and is a very interesting satellite. I would say right now, most little CubeSats that we put into outer space have about 100 times more technology in them than what Sputnik had at the time of its launch. In fact, the only thing that Sputnik had on board was the antennas that you can see, these long poles coming off of the satellite, and this spherical shape. And inside of that was just a little beacon, and it would just basically send out a little beep, 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 and people could measure it on their devices where they were. So it really didn't do much. It just went around the earth and beeped. But at the time, that was cutting edge technology. And another fun fact about why it's a sphere, right? They could have chose any shape, but they chose a sphere because if you go and look into outer space, everything else that's out there, except for some asteroids and things, but they're all spheres, planets, right? So they wanted to call this like the first human-made planet orbit, and they wanted it to look like a planet. So it's very interesting. Okay, so if you got that question right, give yourself 100 points and congratulations. Keep that in mind, and as we get through more questions, keep adding them up. All right, so yes, so satellites now, we say big technology in a small package, right? And what I mean by this is that, right, at the time that Sputnik was made, they had this big sphere, and the only thing they could fit in there that worked was this little beeper, right? And they were really up here in this time frame, right? They were working with equipment that right now would take up the size of a room for a computer. And as the years went by, computers got more and more compact and more powerful, to the point where here we are now in like 2020, and we have our smartphones and our computers, and basically our phone has more computational power than a computer the size of a house had 50 years ago, right? Pretty amazing. And it's really that shrinking of technology that has enabled CubeSats to work. If it wasn't for that, there would be no way to make a Cube satellite. It wouldn't be possible. The other thing that happened is what we call commoditization. It's a big word, but it basically means that this technology is everywhere now, right? Most of you right now, you're sitting at home on a laptop. Maybe you have a phone right next to you. You have all of this technology around you. And people 50, 30 years ago didn't have access to that. And so this is why we say now CubeSats, they really bring everything together now. You can get technology that is small, and you can get it very inexpensive or cheap. And that means just about anybody, literally anybody, could go out and build a CubeSat right now. The difficult part, of course, is getting it into space. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so when we talk about CubeSats, though, we kind of have to learn a little bit more about the language, about how people talk about satellites. And usually satellites are talked about by how much they weigh, their mass. They're not really talking about how big they are, like how much volume they take up. And the reason for that is because if you're going to build a rocket and put something into outer space, the thing that you pay for is the mass, right? You have to build a rocket with enough thrusters to push that mass against gravity and get it out into space. And that is directly related to how much that satellite weighs on Earth. The more it weighs, the harder it is to get it to outer space. And so the folks at NASA and the Canadian Space Agency and the ESA, they all classify satellites according to how much they weigh. And they can be anywhere from very large satellites, like over 1,000 kilograms, all the way down to what they call nanosatellites, which are satellites that usually weigh about 1 kilogram or sometimes less, right? About the size of a duck. And so CubeSats, we say CubeSat, that talks about the shape, and then, but what it really means is that we are a nano satellite. So we're just very light as well. And that's important. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about what's important for CubeSats, right? The technology and the weight, and we can do both. Now we got to talk about, so where do they actually go? You know, space is a big place. And in fact, it turns out there's only certain places we really want them to go in outer space. So what you're looking at here is like a bit of a space map, right? You can see here this blue area. You could think of this like the Earth's surface, and you can see some of the sort of shadow above it. This would be like the atmosphere on Earth. And as you go from Earth and you start to go higher and higher up in the atmosphere, at some point, right around 10 kilometers, maybe up to 15, you really start to push the edge of what we would call atmosphere. Like the air there gets so low that you can't breathe, like you would die if you tried to go outside at that height. But there's still technically some air around you. And so, you know, airplanes fly up there. You see also a picture of a balloon. So I personally do a lot of balloon launches. I will put little satellites on a balloon and then send it way high up into the atmosphere. But even then, it only gets to about 10 to 20 kilometers high. Beyond that, you start to get to another zone called the thermosphere. And up in this area, it's actually quite dangerous. So between 50 kilometers, maybe to 100 kilometers in this range, things are pretty dangerous, actually. It's really hard to put satellites there and to keep them there. They get hit by asteroids, meteorites, there's plasma up there, all kinds of things that want to hurt your satellite. So most of the time, we're just going to shoot our rockets past this danger zone, and we are going to end up here, right around 400 kilometers high. And this is what we will call space, right? You have now gone far enough away from Earth that you can orbit freely, and it's relatively safe for you to be up there. So that's where the International Space Station lives. And that's also where almost all CubeSats go. And the reason is, number one, it's the closest. So we don't have to send rockets further. You know, why would we do that? We already, like, Earth, the space is there, so we'll stop there. So it's like, you know, going to your neighbor's house. It's the first stop. And not only that, but it allows these CubeSats to spin around the Earth. But satellites, these CubeSats, they're so small, they typically don't have their own, what we call propulsion system to keep them up there. And so they naturally start to fall back to Earth over a period of a few weeks, maybe a few months, and they'll burn up in the atmosphere and go away. So these CubeSats are small and inexpensive, and that's okay. We'll put them up there just for a few months, and they'll fall back to Earth, burn up, and they won't contribute to space junk. And so we kind of do that on purpose. Okay, another question. You guys ready? So this one's also worth 100 points. And so the question is, how fast does a CubeSat travel in orbit? Anybody know? 215 miles an hour, 50 kilometers per hour, 7 kilometers per second. Ooh, we got a lot of good answers here. Yep, okay, so, right, oh, sorry, I forgot to give you your choices. Oh gosh. Yeah, so you do have some choices. 100 miles per hour or 160 kilometers per hour, 1,600 kilometers per hour, 16,000 kilometers per hour, or 32,000 kilometers per hour. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of choices here. C and D, not a lot for A or B. Yep, and the answer is absolutely D. Yeah, they're traveling at 20,000, roughly, 20,000 miles per hour or 32,000 kilometers per hour. That is very fast. Yep. Okay, so if you got points on that one, again, congratulations, add that to your total, and we'll revisit when we get to the end of our talk. Okay, so now what is it that satellite or CubeSats do? Right, and this is kind of an open question. And I will say they can do anything. Basically anything that you can think of that would be interesting and can fit in a box, you can do it in a Cube satellite, right? What they say here is the world is your oyster. Whatever you're interested in, you can make it happen. And so I have some examples of some CubeSat missions that have been done, mostly by NASA, because they have, I would say, a lot of the most interesting ones. But again, high school students, middle school students, even elementary school students have made CubeSats and gotten them to space. Okay, so I'm going to give you just some examples. So this here is a little video for Marco 1. It stands for Mars Cube 1. And in fact, I had the pleasure of meeting the lead investigator for this mission. His name is Andrew Klesch, and he's the one who developed and designed these CubeSats specifically to go to Mars. And so we're going to watch a short video on what that CubeSat did.
I'm a software engineer at Amazon, and I learned how to code on Udemy. I got 2 courses. They were both taught by Dr. Angela Yu. Without Udemy, I could not have gone from being an unemployed musician to a software engineer. It's crazy to think that that's possible.
Communicating between Mars and Earth requires a complicated choreography, with everything in the right place at the right time. Sometimes hours can pass before information is relayed from one planet to the other. That's why when NASA's Mars InSight lander launches this year, the rocket will carry 2 tiny satellites on a technology test of their own. Meet Mars Cube 1. Marco, NASA's first CubeSat mission to deep space. These briefcase-sized satellites will travel separately from the InSight lander while they test out new miniaturized technologies. And if they make it to Mars, they could relay information back to Earth about InSight's descent and touchdown, and do it in mere minutes. Although this fast communication isn't crucial to the success of the InSight lander, this CubeSat test could change the way future spacecraft phone home.
Okay, so what we just learned there was that this particular mission, NASA made these CubeSats. You saw that they were actually kind of flat and long. So those were 6U CubeSats. So they had 6 units put together to make a bit of a briefcase size, or maybe the size of like a laptop. And its only job was to gather information from the Mars lander. It accepted that information and then passed it to Earth. And it basically is what we would call a relay satellite. just picks up the signal and passes it along, right? But it actually turned out to be a really important job, and NASA felt like it was, they did an amazing job, actually. It worked very well. So that's one example of a CubeSat. I'll come over here. This is another one. This is NASA's newest launch vehicle called the Space Launch System. And they also have CubeSat launches that go on to here. So this is going to talk about how those CubeSats get on board and how they actually get put into outer space.
NASA is advancing science and technology with the first flight of the Space Launch System, or SLS. As a bonus, SLS will send small satellites called CubeSats to deep space destinations where they can gather valuable data for future exploration missions. The onboard avionics box will command each dispenser to release the small satellites, sending each one on their way to deep space destinations such as the moon or an asteroid. CubeSats flown on the mission will perform in-space experiments and demonstrations that will actively advance the capabilities needed to take humans farther into space than ever before.
Okay. So yeah, there was a lot of information there. So what we saw was basically how NASA is really intending to take a lot of CubeSats on future missions. Like they really think these are very valuable. And what you saw there in that video was you noticed that there was all these CubeSats sort of around the inside of that rocket, and they just kind of shot out a little bit. Right, so what this next video is going to do is kind of explain a little bit more about how you take these satellites and you package them to go on a rocket ship ride, and then how they end up popping out of those boxes so you can actually see what's happening. So this is just a short video sort of explaining that.
Scott, just a real quick question. If we can do that after you. Yeah, from Jaden. Jaden asks, what happens to the thing carrying the CubeSats after it dispensed them?
Yes, great question. In most cases, that is going to be sort of disposed of material, things that will ultimately be recycled back to Earth, right? That little shuttle part that popped off and the CubeSats came out, that is going to be intended just to fall back to Earth and burn up. It's a disposable, what we'll call a bus, right? It's just a means of transportation to get the satellites into space. And then once the satellites are there, we don't care about that part anymore. Yeah, good question. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Let's get into orbit. NASA's CubeSat launch initiative gives CubeSats a free ride on rockets that have room and fuel to spare. It's like a rideshare program. We're already going into space, so your CubeSat is welcome aboard. Once a CubeSat has a seat on a flight, it'll be loaded into a launcher container on the rocket. These containers have a long technical name, but let's just call them dispensers for short. Each CubeSat is stacked into the dispenser like a pea in a pod, with its power turned off until the right time during the mission. After the launch, once the rocket is at just the right elevation, the main spacecraft separates and heads on its way. Then it's the CubeSat's turn. A few seconds later, the dispenser door springs open, and another spring inside pushes the CubeSats free. Each CubeSat's transmitters turn on, and its power and other tools will begin to work. Then your CubeSat is ready for its mini mission in space.
Imagine making $453,000 in a single month as an affiliate marketer without relying on Google, Facebook.
Scott, we had a question come up from Ethan. Ethan asks, can you add thrusters into CubeSats to keep them in orbit?
Excellent question. And I would say people are trying. Again, the problem is these satellites are generally really small, and it takes a lot of weight to add a thruster. And right now, most thrusters are like, some CubeSats have thrusters actually, but most of them are just to like spin the satellite. a little bit to help what we call orientate that satellite in relationship to, say, the Earth's surface, or maybe pointed at the sun. So there's little thrusters that help nudge it left or right just a little bit. But there's really no thrusters that help keep it into orbit for long periods of time. You need a lot of propellant to do that. And we're still researching new types of systems that will allow us to maintain orbit for longer. But I would say we're maybe another 10, 20 years away from having something actually ready to do that.
And a couple of students are asking, how can we learn how to make CubeSat?
Yeah, excellent question. And I do have a few slides that'll talk about that, but for the most part, a lot of it is there are a ton of resources available. So if you have a keyboard and you have a Google search engine, you will find just a wealth of information about people who are building their own satellites, and they'll put that information out there for you to review and to read. And then there's also a lot of programs. Like here in Maine, I run a program where all we do is we help students just like you actually, figure out what kind of mission you want to do. That's sort of step number one. You have to have your idea. And then once you have your idea, you have to start thinking about what technology do you need to make that idea happen. And that can be the hardest part right there, knowing what it is you need to be successful. And so the place to start is absolutely find somebody either local or somebody even on the internet that could help be a coach. And that is going to be so important as you start. But I think you'll quickly find that as you just start learning, you get so much information so quickly, you'll be amazed how fast you can become, a CubeSat expert yourself. Yeah, just keep at it, ask lots of questions.
Scott, sorry, speaking of questions, we're getting quite a lot in the chat. Keep them coming, guys. Josh, I'd like to know, how long does a CubeSat stay in orbit, and how much does it cost to launch a CubeSat?
Another excellent questions. Yeah, so for the first one about how long does it stay up there, the real answer is it depends on the rocket that you go on. So as you saw in those videos, usually people are going to send a rocket into space, and they usually have the thing that's most important, usually another satellite, or maybe it's a resupply mission to the International Space Station. That's the primary job. And that rocket's going to go to wherever that primary thing needs to be. It could be low in the orbit, or it could be high in the orbit. So wherever that CubeSat lands dictates how long it's going to stay up. And so, for example, if you were going to go to the International Space Station and be let go from there, and that's going to be your launch point, you could probably reasonably expect to be in orbit somewhere around 6 to 8 months. Okay, if you're a much lower orbit than that, again, it could be just a few weeks. And it really depends on how high up they go. And then the next question about cost is, I have seen, so number one, your satellite, I've seen satellites built for a few $100s. That does sound like a lot, but compared to others, like the Marco satellite that you saw, that cost about, I think it was $18 million, something like that to make. And so the fact that somebody could build one for a few $100s is pretty cheap. So building the satellites isn't the hard part. I'd say the most expensive part is finding that ride, that rocket, right? Finding somebody with space and somebody on a mission already going that you can piggyback your ride on. And so NASA has this thing called the CubeSat Launch Initiative, where their only job is to help people like you find space on a rocket for you to put your satellite that you built into space. It's a pretty cool program. In fact, I'm going to show you a link to that a little bit later. Okay. So I'll keep going here, but yeah, keep asking questions. This is great. So in the last two videos, you saw how there was right, a CubeSat launcher this little, looked like a little cannon that shot the CubeSats out. And I'll say that's the typical method for getting those into space. And so what I have here are just two videos that really show that process in real life, like what actually happens. And so what we have here is CubeSats that are being sent. The first one, which will be on the left, is what we call a manual deployment. So this CubeSat made its way to the International Space Station. And while it's there, an astronaut is going to literally put on their spacesuit. They're going to hold the CubeSat in their hand. They're going to walk outside, maybe float outside, and then they're going to throw it into outer space. So let me just show you that process. And that starts right about here. You can see the space station, and you can see the satellite, the astronaut on the outside. And there we go. They just manually.
And there goes the first of the two Tanusha satellites deployed manually by Sergei Rosansky. The trajectory operations officer, our ballistics officer here in Mission Control, reports a good trajectory as it goes away, aft, and nadir from the Piers docking compartment. Again, this is the first of two satellites commemorating a pair of significant anniversaries, the 60th anniversary of the launching of the first Sputnik satellite on October.
Okay, so that's just a flavor, right? So that would be the quick and dirty way to put a satellite into orbit, to literally just throw it. And you saw what happened to that satellite. It's tumbling and spinning. And you can imagine if that satellite had a camera on board, like it would be seeing just space spinning all around it. And so you can do a deployment this way, but it really limits the kinds of things you can do with your satellite. So another way is what we see over here on the right, and this is that CubeSat dispenser. And this is literally like a little satellite cannon. It's just going to, you load them up and you shoot them off. And so we'll see this in action. And this starts right about here. So you see an astronaut looking through one of the windows of the International Space Station, looking out to the CubeSat cannon. And you see the doors are open. So we're ready to launch a CubeSat. And you'll see in just a second, it pops out. And you can see now that it's like floating away from the International Space Station. And what's really interesting about this is you notice how just straight and flat it flies now. So in this case, you can imagine if you had a camera on that satellite and you were looking down at the Earth, you would get an amazing picture of the clouds and the sky and the Earth ground beneath you. So that's why a lot of satellites get launched this way. But it really depends on your mission, right? All of these things that you see, all of it is driven to what is your mission and what is it you hope that satellite to do.
Scott, Ethan had a question that was really quite interesting. Something very innovative, I think. Can you add a parachute and a heat reflective material and collect the CubeSat at the field near your house?
Wow. Yeah, that would be very interesting. I think the answer is probably, but I don't know enough to say if that's possible. I think theoretically it'd be possible. And I would love to work with a team to see if we could figure out how to do that. That would be super fun. Yeah, great question, great comment. Okay, so another space satellite trivia. So this one's worth another 100 points. So the question is, how many CubeSats have been launched into space? Okay, and I do have choices. So we have, are there 500 CubeSats, 1,000 CubeSats, 2,000, or 3,000? And I know there was a question earlier in this segment that asked a similar question, how many total satellites are there? But I'm looking for specifically CubeSats. I'm just gonna pop the chat open. I see a lot of D. Some C's, a lot of D's. Yes, the answer is D. 3,000, roughly 3,000 CubeSats have been launched. I'd say the vast majority of them have already burned up in our atmosphere. So the actual number floating around up there is something much less than 3,000. But that's a lot of CubeSat satellites. Again, they haven't been around that long. And so just in the past 30 years, we put 3,000 CubeSats up there. So that's like 1,000 CubeSats that go up every year. Think about that. That's a big number. Sorry, 100 satellites, not 1,000. Did my math wrong. Okay, so we only got a little bit more to get through. So how does the CubeSat work? I think we had some questions about that. So actually, what is the stuff that we need to make CubeSat function? And I would say there's 5 primary components that go into making a satellite. The first one is your antenna. And the antenna I like to think about is really like the voice box of the CubeSat. Right? Your voice box is what translates thoughts in your mind. You squeeze muscles in your lungs and the air comes out, and that air has a very specific information that's encoded into it, right? We hear it as words in our ears and we understand their meaning. And so that's what the antenna is. It's like the voice of the CubeSat. It's what's putting that information out to the world to hear. But the antenna can't do anything by itself. The antenna needs a radio transmitter to tell it what to, how to say things. So I would think of this like my lungs, right? It's pushing air over my vocal cords and my voice box, and it's putting that energy into that antenna to then make that signal happen. So that's what the transmitter does. And it's also, the transmitter is helpful because it kind of tells it a little bit about, how it should sound, how loud it should be. It gives it all of that kind of information. But of course, none of this makes speech yet. In order to make speech, you need to have a brain. And so every CubeSat is going to have some kind of a computer. And the computer is what's telling the transmitter what it wants the antenna to say, right? What language is happening, what information needs to go out, right? All of that's done on the computer. In addition to the computer, of course, we can't run electronics without a power system. So we're going to typically need a battery pack at a minimum. Battery packs will last you a few days in space. And to keep your satellite running, you're also going to need your solar panels, right? That'll be a requirement to keep running. And the last thing you're going to need are sensors, right? I think about our CubeSat, it's going on a trip, it's going to outer space. And anytime I go on a trip, I'm bringing things like cameras so I can document my journey. And the same thing with a satellite is it needs sensors to be able to record what's going on in its surroundings, gather that information, and then that computer can process that information. And then it can tell the transmitter through the antenna to tell all your friends about this great vacation you just went on, right? That's exactly what the CubeSat's doing. So you can make a CubeSat out of just these 5 components, and it could work actually amazingly well, depending what you're trying to do. And then, of course, it can get very complicated from there if you want it to be. But I like to keep things simple. And so most of the satellites I put into space too usually just build upon these 5 things. And then what really comes down is to what sensors do you want? Do you want cameras? Do you want gas sensors, light sensors, all kinds of sensors you can put on there. Okay. And then what you got to do is once you have all that equipment picked out, the things you want your satellite to do, then the next thing is you got to figure out how to put it all together. Assembly of the CubeSat is very important. You need to make sure, right? It's a small box. You got to make sure you can fit everything inside. So people spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to put everything in the box to make sure you can fit everything and that it will work properly. And as you build satellites, you spend a lot of time on doing this part of it, trying to make sure everything fits. So in this example, you can see here that we have cameras installed, you have your battery pack right here, you have your computer station there, you have solar panels here. These yellow things are the antennas that are sticking out. They look a little different than the ones I showed you before, but it's basically just a little piece of metal that springs out, and that's the voice box of the CubeSat. Okay. And the last thing that I haven't even mentioned is programming. Super important. You cannot do a satellite unless you know how to do some programming. And I know a lot of you are very knowledgeable about that, and that's excellent. If you're not sure about programming, you can definitely learn and you can work on putting these things together. Okay. So for us, the last thing that we do is once we get our satellites built and put into space, you have to have a way of talking to it. Right? That satellite's up there, it's got its antenna, its voice box, it's yelling, hello, hello, I'm here, is anybody listening? And so us on the ground, we have to have what we call a tracking station or a ground station to listen for the CubeSats as they go over our heads. And so this is at our university. We have some students that have put antennas on the roof, and we're able to look on computers, which is what you see over here on the left. This is the signal that those antennas pick up. So we're listening and we can see that there's like a little tiny bump, right? There's a line here that's nice and flat, and then there's a bump. And we're saying that we just detected a signal at this area on our transmission. And we can say that, oh, that is this satellite, and we can even decode what that satellite was saying, and we can basically have a conversation with it. It's pretty cool.
Just a one-time $27 payment. That's it. For less than what you spend on lunch.
Right? And in fact, we're just one of many. All over the world, there are people who have these ground stations, and they all belong to what's called SatNogs, which is basically a group of people just like me, just like you, who decided to build a ground station to listen for CubeSats, and they all work together tracking them. So each of these little dots that you see on this map is a ground station that's a member of this SatNog network. And they all listen for each other's satellites as they go by. And these lines are basically like the traces of an example satellite as it moves overhead. So if I look at this one down here in South Africa, right, this is where the ground station is. And this line means that there was a CubeSat that went right over their head, moving right along this line as the CubeSat orbited the Earth. Now, because the Earth is big, and just like the sun in the morning, you see it comes up over the horizon, the sun goes over our head, and then it goes down on the other side. Same thing happens to these CubeSats. This line starts when the satellite comes up over the horizon for these people, and then it goes over their heads, and then the satellite goes down and it sets on the other side, and then they lose track of it. So they only see CubeSats for a small period of time, but while the satellite's overhead, they can talk to it. And they can let everybody else know. They say, hey, I just saw a CubeSat go over my head, and this is what it told me. And it will share that information with everybody else. Okay. So the last thing is testing your satellite, right? You're putting stuff into space, and but you don't want to just put it up there without testing it. So we always test it. And the way that we test it a lot, as we said, like I've done a lot of balloon missions. We will do balloon launches. And so here's a picture of us just last summer. You can see here, these are all high schools, people that I worked with, and they have all their CubeSats lined up here on the bottom, and they're all connected to this big balloon. And this balloon is going to be what carries it up into the upper atmosphere. Not quite to space, but pretty close. And then this picture shows that leaving the ground, and each team was holding their CubeSat. I think there's about a dozen CubeSats connected to this balloon, and it's going up high. This is a picture when it was at its highest point. So this was around 100,000 feet. Sorry, I don't know the conversion to kilometers, but it's high. And at this point, the balloon burst because it got so high, and then the satellites start to fall back to Earth. But what's great about this is as the satellites went up, we can talk to them, we can make sure they're working. And the best part too is they do come back to us. They come back to the ground so that we can make them better. If something didn't work right, we can fix it before we actually go onto a rocket. And that rocket's going to bring it all the way to space and we'll never see it again. So we'll actually do a couple balloon launches with it first to make sure everything's working right. And then we'll put it on a rocket. Okay. Sometimes though, getting it back can be a little hard. So this is a picture about what typically happens is you don't really know where your satellite's going to land when it comes back to Earth. And this is a picture of our latest one. It got stuck in a tree really high up there. And in fact, we had to use this really long pole to poke it out of the tree and have it all fall back down to the ground. And sometimes it's very hard to do, but fun. It's always fun. Okay, and I think this is my last slide. So CubeSat Launch Initiative, again, if you really want to get started and into CubeSats, definitely this would be a good place to start. If you have ideas, this CubeSat Launch Initiative, again, you just basically have to tell them your idea and what you want to build. They'll find people to help work with you on how to build it. They'll even find that ride on that rocket ship to get it into outer space. They're open to everybody. They just look for you to basically go onto their website and give them some information, and they're here to help you. Okay, last question, 100 points. What did the sun do to knock out 40 Starlink satellites? In fact, it happened just about a month ago. Anybody know what happened to those satellites? Absolutely, man, you guys are right on the money. Yep, solar flares. Let me see if I can get it. Yep, there it was. Yeah, the sun had a pretty major solar flare event that happened, and that ionized gas came over and it hit the satellites as they're orbiting the Earth, and it messed up their internal computers, and they stopped working. They're still floating around. They just fortunately don't work anymore. But that kind of happens. Space is a dangerous place. There's micrometeoroids, solar flares, all kinds of things that want to hurt your satellite. But luckily they're small and usually they do a good job surviving. Okay, so I'll open it up to any other questions that you guys have.
Oh, thank you, Scott. I know, do you have another 10 minutes maybe, Scott, just so that they can ask some questions?
Oh, absolutely. I know I went a little long and my apologies, but yeah, I can stick around for questions.
Don't worry, it was great. So I know we're running out of time. If you have to take off, it's okay for you to take off. And I know also lots of students have really good questions and has been trying to get your question asked. What you do is now, in Zoom, there's a place for you to raise your hand. You just go, I think it's under reactions or next to your own thing. And there's a place to ask question. And once you ask a question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute. Let me try to go get a slightly different view. I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to call your name, unmute yourself, and then you can ask a question. Okay. The first person I'm going to call is Rishi. Let me try to unmute you. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
I had a question. What programming language is used to program the CubeSats?
Excellent question. I will say there are many different types of programs that will be used. In fact, even on a single satellite, there could be many different programs that are written in different languages to make a particular satellite work. There is a standard protocol, though, for when it comes to the antennas and how the antennas communicate together. And in fact, that's regulated by, I'm going to forget the name of the agency, but they do request that when you have an antenna, that you do a process called encryption. And the idea here is that you don't want everybody necessarily to know what you're trying to say. And so only people with the link that knows how to decode your message can actually read it. And so that's pretty interesting.
Cool.
A good question.
Yeah, the next person is Zara. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Go ahead. All right, so we're not hearing you, Zara. I know you're unmuted. Okay, I'm gonna try to go to the next person. And Zara can try again later on, okay? Atif, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask, how far does a typical CubeSat or any satellite travel before falling back to the Earth?
Ooh, excellent question. Total distance traveled is a tough one. Usually what we talk about is like the number of basically like transits that have happened. You know, how many times, if I'm standing here on the Earth at a particular spot, how many times does that satellite go over my head before it crashes back into Earth? And it can travel usually overhead anywhere between like 7 to 20 times a day. And so depending on the life of the mission, it could go overhead, 1,000 times, 5,000 times, 10,000 times. So that's really how we measure it. And I guess we could figure out, we could do the math to try to get the total number of kilometers done, but I have never done that math before. That's a good question.
Very cool. Yeah, next person is Sandy. Go ahead, Sandy.
Hi, I have a question. Like, if you play chess, what like there's usually a tag, like for example, FM and stuff. So what title name do you have?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so when you become a chess player, you usually are trying to win your game so that you can become a ranked player and get a title. Unfortunately, I'm not good enough to have a title yet. So I guess my title would be intermediate player. Not a grandmaster yet.
International, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not good enough for international either.
Okay.
I hope maybe one day I'll get there. Great question.
It's always fun to just play chess and then have a
Yes.
great time. All right, next person is Zainab. Zaynab. Go ahead.
My name is Zainab. So I had a question. Do you suggest any special positions in space exploration as future careers?
Oh, absolutely. The space industry, and I call it an industry, just like there's an automotive industry and the outdoor industry, the space industry is growing like crazy. There are so many companies right now putting rockets and satellites into space that they need people. So I'll say there isn't a particular, position other than if you like math, if you like science, and if you did anything related to engineering and being creative and problem solving, there's going to be a place for you in the space industry. Absolutely. And programming too. You can do programming. Yep, there's lots of need for that.
Very cool. Yeah, I went to a conference earlier this week and I actually met a female astronaut there, which is pretty cool. Got my picture taken as well. So
that is exciting.
It is exciting. All right, Ethan, go ahead, Ethan. Ethan Young.
Hello, I would like to ask if you can access the ground station from the internet.
You want to try to access our university system. That's a great question. I'll have to talk to our technologist. So we have a space technologist whose only job it is to look at that ground station. And I know that you can see some of the data off our website, but I don't know how often we make that available, or if you can just, like, if it's always around. That's a great question. I'm going to ask, and I'm going to see if I can get an answer to that.
Very cool. All right, so we're going to try again with Zara. Go ahead, Zara.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yay, go ahead.
Okay, so I have two questions. My first question is, how long does it take a CubeSat to travel, like to get into the space?
Mm-hmm. So if we're on the ground, you're in the rocket and it's starting to blast off. Like, how long does it take before that satellite is actually into outer space?
Yeah.
Yep, that travel, it can vary, but I would say it's typically on the order of about 15 to 30 minutes, somewhere in that neighborhood is when you're really out there. And it's really at the point where, you know, you might have actually been in space a little sooner than that, but by the time the rocket jettisons and you're kind of free floating, you know, that could take about that long.
And I have another question. So, like, how the CubeSat has a camera, right? And it basically sees our Earth. Can it see any other planet in our solar system?
Absolutely. Yes. People are making all kinds of CubeSats to do all kinds of things. I say the camera is probably like the #1 thing people love to put on CubeSats because it's always fun to take pictures from space. But just like in space, like there's nothing to block your view. You can look out in a direction and you can see for basically ever. Unlike on Earth, if I stood on a mountain and I looked out, eventually there's a horizon or the sky kind of blurs my sight so I can't see things. Maybe there's clouds, but up there, there's nothing blocking your vision. And in fact, we here in Maine are even trying to build a satellite to look at the moon. And the reason why we want to look at the moon is that the Earth actually kind of glows a little bit, and our glow from the Earth hits the moon, and then the moon kind of gets a little shiny, especially when it's on the dark side of the moon. It gets a little shiny, and we can actually see that light. It's called Earth shine, and we can see that with our cameras from our satellite. It's pretty cool.
Want to get into software development, data analytics, or IT and security? Well, do yourself a favor and grab this course on.
Okay, cool. Next person, we're gonna have Ray. Go ahead, Ray. By the way, we're gonna limit 1 question per person. We're gonna do for another 5 minutes since we're running out of time already. And
Okay.
Go ahead, Ray.
If the satellite gets an alien signal and there's no transmitter underneath it, will it have to wait? Can it forget it? Can it forget the message?
That is an excellent question. So I guess technically, yep, depending on what the satellite was built for, it may or may not be able to tell us back on Earth what happened. So if that satellite had, like, let's say, a camera and maybe took a picture of the alien spacecraft or something, or got a signal that it measured with an antenna, if that satellite was programmed to store that information and wait until it found a ground station to communicate, then we would get the signal and we'd be okay. But not all satellites work that way. Some of them, they just relay. They just gather, send, gather, send. And if there's no one there to listen, no one's going to hear it and we'll miss it. Yep, that would be sad.
Good question. Okay, we'll have 3 more people have the opportunity to ask a question. Tejasri, Tejasre. If you're there, okay, go ahead.
I'm actually her sister, brother, and can there be more than 12 CubeSats in space?
Absolutely, yes. There can be hundreds of them at a time. In fact, that reminds me of Elon Musk, and he has his Starlink satellites. And I think his plan was to have somewhere around 3,000, or maybe it was 30,000. It was a big number And he wants to build a huge network of satellites that all orbit the Earth all at the same time to give us really good internet. That's his plan. So yeah, you can have many, many, many satellites up there.
Awesome. Next person, Joanna, go ahead.
Hi.
Yep.
Hello.
I'd like to ask a question.
How far does a satellite go per hour?
Yes, they go very fast. Faster than I can drive in my car, that's for sure.
Really?
They can go about 20,000 miles per hour, or like 32,000 kilometers per hour.
That's faster than I thought.
It's very fast. Yes.
How fast does airplane go? Probably about 1,000 or less, like 700 miles per hour. So that's like about 20 times of, I don't know how fast an airplane can fly.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
20
Yeah. All right, I see someone who really want to get called and change the name to Please Choose Me. So for that spirit, I'm gonna unmute you so you can ask yourself, but do tell us what your real name is. And this is the last question. Go ahead.
My name is Max, and I'm in New Zealand right now. My question is, what would happen if like all the satellites and like CubeSats like got destroyed? What would happen?
Oh, my apologies. I actually couldn't hear your question. Could you repeat it one more time, please?
Oh, let me try to. Yeah, I think someone else was unmuted, so that's why I'm going to unmute him again to go ahead. Go ahead.
My question was, what would happen if all of the satellites and like CubeSats were like destroyed?
Ooh, yeah, that would actually be really bad. All of our cell phones would stop working. All of our maps would stop working. I'm sure there's other bad things that would happen too. Our weather tracking would stop. We rely on our satellites for just about everything related to technology right now. And that if something happened, like a major solar flare knocked out all of our satellites like that, it would be very bad for us on Earth. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, that's very cool. Yeah, it's a really good question. And then we're relying more and more on the satellites technologies. I do have one question for you as well, Scott. I remember, I'm not so sure I remember it correctly, but I seem to remember I saw a list of recent candidates for CubeSat, and I saw a lot of them are actually sponsored by universities. And I'm wondering about, let's say, for regular high school, like student want to do something about it. Do you think that sort of someone in high school can likely mentor them to make it happen, kind of like a lot of these days robotics competitions can be done that way, or you kind of really need someone like more of a college professor or level or professional engineer level to do something with the team?
Yeah, I mean, experience definitely helps. Again, I'll say that anybody can build CubeSats, but having that experience of going through the trial and failure part of it to know how to make it right, there's a learning curve there. And so it's helpful to have experience, but absolutely. I know some amazing students who even junior high school level who just had interest, did some internet searching, learned about these different things, and found a little bit of money, maybe from family and friends who wanted to help, or maybe the school helped buy some of the equipment, and they could start building their own CubeSats. And there are a lot of competitions available, and maybe, I don't know everything that's going on around the world, but I can just say here in the United States, like NASA, the Department of Education, they constantly run competitions for high schools and middle schools, specifically for learning like that. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and you just got to keep looking.
Very cool. All right. So I'm going to show you guys a couple more slides, but in the meantime, I want everyone to think about and then type in the chat. What are the couple of things that you feel like you learned today that you think are most interesting to you? Let's see what you have learned. And in the meantime, let me just kind of quickly share with you a bit more about what's coming up. So we do run these programs on a regular basis. And today we obviously have a very special speaker, Scott, to come talk about CubeSat, very exciting topic. We actually have another free event coming up tomorrow as well. I think it's tomorrow Pacific time, maybe 11 a.m. or something. It's also free. So I know a lot of you guys have done really interesting projects, and we're trying to teach you how do you create your own project portfolio so you can share with friends and you'll know how to, take screenshot of it, make GIF, or even make short videos of your project and upload it so other people can see it. It's pretty exciting. And we do have other NASA related classes as well. We have a space science club, which is for grade K to 3. We go through a lot of different interesting topics that are space related. Bruce was here earlier. He's in Europe, so I think he had to leave a little early, and he actually ran a nice series of classes for us as well. And then we have a pretty extensive series of summer camps and spring camps that are available on our website for you guys to enjoy and learn more about all the different things about computer science. So with that, I'd love to hear, what have you guys learned today that you think are most interesting? What CubeSat is? Yeah, even just something like that is super, super exciting, right? It can go up to 20,000 miles. Awesome. I think, yeah, it's so exciting. It makes this whole space and the CubeSat make the whole, like doing something for space becomes so much more accessible. It's just kind of unthinkable. And then it's also interesting, as you said, that not only that, but there are also the ground networks and all of those things that that are readily available for people who want to experiment with it. So you don't have to kind of build the entire infrastructure from scratch, which would be a huge amount of job. And then someone, Alexandra, said, oh, I learned that they actually come back to Earth. Might get destroyed in the atmosphere, but yeah, they do come back. Cool, awesome. Well, thank you so much. You guys are awesome and lots of great learnings. Yeah, someone actually asked a question, wouldn't this CubeSat break when falling back to Earth in the balloon test?
Yes, I was just gonna hope to answer that too. Yeah, so there's a parachute. Yeah, it comes down nice and slow. It's okay. Yep.
Do they all come down together or like because they went up together, so they all come back together, right?
Yeah, they're all tied together on a string typically. And yeah, I mean, when they all fall down together. Yeah, it's like a train pulling into the station of CubeSats.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. They make it easier to find as well. If it's just like individual ones, and it will become quite of a egg hunt to get them all figured out. Awesome. Great. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank Scott again for an excellent conversation today. And I'm sure many of you would want to go build a CubeSat, and I'm going to look more into it as well. Maybe our program can organize something to help kids like build CubeSat. That would be super exciting. And I also want to thank everyone for joining. Awesome questions. And I hope to see you guys again in future events.
Great. Nice to meet everybody. Have a good night.